Let's knock this motherfucker out right now. So anyone who's had a hyper-religious episode, they were experiencing a mental heaven on earth. Problem with hyper-religiosity is once the money runs out, then so does the episode. People don't usually last very much longer than, a few minutes, a few hours. Sometimes it's days. Occasionally you have someone last a few weeks. The feelings are most intense at the very beginning of the hyper-religious episode. As time passes, then you just sort of balance out in a mental sort of heaven on earth, a mental heaven on earth for yourself. The thing is, it's not that difficult to achieve that mental state. It's really just when you start focusing on God and religion. God's like, oh, this person has this antenna up, so this individual has his or her or whatever antenna up. So let me start making him feel really good mentally and physically because God wants to have, sort of his reign on earth. And you get rewarded the closer you are mentally to God. As my cousin once said, it's a placebo for the masses, which is true because God hooks you up when you're close to him. My point is this. At the very beginning of the hyper-religious episode, because it's such a new feeling, it's almost like, I like this analogy, I came up with it. It's almost like it's like you're on a bike falling in midair onto a balance beam. Once you hit the balance beam, there's only one thing to do to stay on that bike, and that's to move forward. You need forward movement, okay? So the toughest part, the most difficult part about the exercise is that very beginning, and it gets easier and easier. But if you start thinking, well, because you'll feel like $1 million, if you start thinking, oh, I'm God, or oh, I can see the future, or I can read minds, God's like, you're done. So the point is that, very few people get past that first stage, and then you have to get past the second stage, which is kind of starting to sort it all out in your mind. And then later stages, when you get into like a couple months, or occasionally someone will have a year, an anomaly will have a year. But the whole point is, it's not just achieving the state. You also have to go through, you have to balance out. Then you have to see how it applies to all of society. So you need a knowledge of the different elements of society, economics, government, medicine, media, religion, technology, these different facets of our world society. And once you poke around enough, you start to put together a plan. You're like, how could I maintain this state? Or how could I articulate this state to others so they could understand it? How can we revamp or retool society to accommodate for it? And, once you have all that done, then you got to write the fucking thing down into a plan. See, most people who, they're like, oh, the second coming, or, the end of the world, you can't just go and be like, hey, the world's going to end, and then the world ends. There's no fucking plan to get out of it. To help people, a certain portion of the world population, make it through that tribulation period. You see, so anyone who's ever said, well, it's the end of the world on this date, they're fucking stupid because they didn't have a fucking plan, and it would just, it flushes God's hard work down the toilet, okay? So the point is, if you're lucky enough to get into the hyper-religious state, great. If you're lucky enough then to stabilize, even better. If you're lucky enough to start piecing together how it applies to little parts of the world, our system, or God calls it Babylon, then that's great. But at the end of the day, you need a plan to overhaul everything. And it has to be something that's actionable for each individual. Do X and Y, and you can jumpstart your hyper-religious state, whoever you are. Any fucking moron can understand it. And you're ready to have conversations and drop the fucking hammer on, experts, quote unquote, in these different parts of our society which don't work. So that's it. So basically, God needed someone who could balance out in a hyper-religious state, could have the ability to sustain himself through whatever means necessary, just to stay in the game, and then explore the different facets of our socioeconomic structures, And then, oh yeah, have experience distilling very complex ideas down into very simple, actionable tasks. So here's what it comes down to, and this is great. Once you're done with all that, and you write the fucking thing down, you still have to have like a step, a few steps of a plan. Anyway, so here's how it shakes out. If you are a human being, okay, look up Exodus 20 verses 1 through 17. Make a list of everything you've ever done wrong or thought about doing wrong. Any thought that's broken any of those commandments. Once you identify them, pull out your phone or borrow one from a friend, because now we have over half the world's population connected to the internet. Upload a full confession, and you're casting a vote, for God's sort of new government. Not my government, not your government, God's government, where we all look up and we say, there he is. We all just know he's there, and is part of it. There's no more illness. In theory, you can beat death. And if you do something wrong, he'll punish you based off, some physical reaction. You'll have a heart attack or, a sore throat or something like that. There you go. So that's the government. You have to survive using money from now until July 20th of 2020. After that, we're going to a moneyless system. So you don't have to think about, well, how am I going to stabilize and blah, blah, blah. And if you're a human being who participates in this system, you're naturally going to avoid any activities or even thoughts that break any of his commandments, just 10 of them. Simple 10 article constitution. And that's it. But the key is when you think about breaking a command, any thought, even if it's involuntary, he's going to punish you for that. So the key is to then, work on overhauling your way of thinking. And then I can get into like all the different areas of Babylon or society that breaking the 10 commandments sort of affects, and how climate change is directly related to having money in a system, the waste of, people pursuing money instead of actually what would make them happy, which turns out none of us know what is going to make us happy, because we have not the ability to see in the future. God does, and he can communicate our perfect roles or perfect journeys by using these little things called coincidences, and you get more of them the more charity you provide the world with. So that's it. So that was sort of the big mystery. But the thing is, anyone could say that. It's like, look, yeah, just upload a confession, your illness goes away. If you think or physically break one of the 10 commandments, you will feel pain. So don't do that, and work on revising your thinking. And on this certain date, 16 months from now, we're going to go to a moneyless system. So carte blanche, have fun between now and then. By the way, your works follow you. So whatever you've done wrong, you may want to make up for it by providing charity. Anyone could do that. But you had to have a story behind it. Something cool. And the question was, who was worthy? Who had a hyper-religious episode? Like all the other ones. But who fucking had a kick-ass story to come out of the gate and lead with? See, when you write the book, the first half of the book is your story. So if you're like, well, I was at some Nebraskan seminary and I felt God, and then people are like, dude, go fuck yourself. We're in 2019, man. Give me something good. You know what I mean? But if you're like, well, I was, in the south of France, and then I introduced the #1 singer-songwriter in the fucking world to a producer on the 2013 Grammy Award-winning Album of the Year, and then came back stateside, and then went to LA to meet the #1 booking agent in the fucking world, and there's 3 US presidents involved, and the #1 trumpeter, all these little things. People are like, what the fuck, who's this guy? It's just, you're worthy of delivering this message. And then you also have the background to sort of sift through all the broken parts of society and say, look, we're not doing this anymore. The whole healthcare thing that takes up 10% of carbon emissions or whatever in the US, that's going to be gone, because we have a new form of universal healthcare, thanks God. Oh, and all these other little areas. But you also kind of have to chime in and say, well, why is it now? Why are we why are we learning this now all of a sudden? It's because, the commander-in-chief decided to militarize space, so that's an issue. Secondly, because we're going intergalactic, you need to have healthcare universally. So you can't have a surgeon on these fucking small little shuttles or spaceships or whatever. It's not easy to do. So it's why it's like, if I feel sick up there, I just upload a confession. I don't actually have to see a doctor. Oh yeah, and then when I'm sort of in some distant reach of the galaxy, when it takes 45 minutes for my voice to travel back to Earth or whatever, I don't have time. If a loved one dies, I don't have time to sit there and wait for a 45-minute phone call and then respond and then go back and forth and spend 2 days going back and forth to get all the details. You know what I mean? It's got to be instantaneous. And the same way that God communicates in our bodies with pain when we think or do something against one of the 10 commandments that's instantaneous, well, he can also help us understand when there's something wrong with one of our loved ones, you see. So that's why that's important too. So yeah, that's kind of it. Hyper-religiosity was the key to the whole thing. Jesus, Moses, these guys were they had a Messiah complex. Grandiose delusions, all that shit. But because, they're from a long line of folks who generally have fucked up childhoods, they're used to rolling with punches when things get crazy. And when you start to feel close to God, as you will, as that bicycle hits the balance beam that everyone's going to go through, or they're going to die. It's one or the other. You're either going to heaven on earth or you're going to go to hell. I mean, it's on earth. You're going to die or you're going to go to a state of bliss. It's so fucking crazy. But my point is, when that happens, when you go through it, it's rocky at first because it's so new. You're so used to being in a mental hell on earth that, the Davidic line, we're just crazy enough to hang with it, to balance and then to articulate. Well, we aren't able to do it. I'm able to do it. No one can fucking understand what anyone else is saying. So that's why you have to be a teacher. Plus you had to be a statistician to run the Rapture study. And then you also had to have an understanding of media. So you could see how subconscious and sort of subliminal messages reinforce your mind to break some of the 10 commandments without you even knowing it. Just your voluntary thoughts, your sort of raw thinking is tweaked because of media as it stands. Oh yeah, and then when people start running around trying to replicate what the Messiah has done, they're going to be recording their journeys too, except they're not going to be sitting there with a bunch of, grips and gaffers and, location scouts, hair and makeup. They're just going to be pulling out their phones like I am right now. And in doing so, they're just going to be shooting reality. So the graven image commandment, which is like, don't make a graven image. That means don't make any visual forms of media that are produced. And like right now, there's no production. I'm walking around with a phone in a neighborhood. But when you start to get a whole lighting crew and all the stuff I mentioned before here, well, then things get graven really fast. And all of a sudden they start showing my face the way they think it should be. Well, the word should is toxic. So that becomes graven. My point is that when people start running around with their phones chasing coincidences around, God's leading them down their perfect path to another role, not the Messiah, because that role's already taken. But now there's other roles that need to be filled. And when those get filled, the journey that you go on to fill those roles as you record it, you're going to have a kick-ass fucking story too. So, all the Messiah is a template who understands the whole system, who is able to balance out in a hyper-religious state. And now all anyone else has to do is achieve a hyper-religious state. They don't actually have to solve the whole fucking equation because it's nearly impossible No one's done this in fucking 2,000 years for a reason, because it's insane to even attempt to do. But once you do it and you write it down and you fucking upload it to the internet, that no one's gonna read it, then you can just reach out to a few friends, maybe post something online and say, today's the day. People are like, oh yeah, you're crazy, whatever. And then boom, earthquakes. Because there is a God who monitored all of your activity, saw that you mentally checked off every item from each component of eschatology from the 4 major religions that applied, namely Christianity and Judaism, although the Hindus and the Muslims were correct as well. Muslims very correct in certain regards. But as you went through all that, and you got a fucking peace plan and a global peace deal to sort of resolve the 3 Abrahamic religions, and then on top of that, kicked Babylon's ass by applying hyper-religiosity across the board in terms that people can actually understand. God's like, man, I got a whole plan here. This motherfucker came up with it. It's great story at the beginning, gets fucking intense at the end. He can articulate it, but he doesn't even need to be there because it's self-sustaining. It's a standalone document. Goes like wildfire because of all the PR based off Jesus' death, 2,000 years ago. People still remember that name nowadays because of this reason. That was the whole reason he had to die. And then bing, bang, boom, earthquakes. People freak the fuck out. They read this plan. They're like, holy shit, this sounds either awesome or to others it's going to sound like hell. Not like hell, but like they're going to hate it. You're either going to love the plan or hate the plan. And if you love it, you're on Team A with me. And if you hate it, you're on Team B with Donald Trump. And that's it. Everyone picks a side. Team A rolls out to have the largest festival in the history of the human species. We all party in the desert. And then everyone gets thumped on in Team B, trying to maintain some semblance of Babylon, which will fail. Eventually, the leader of Team B will try to invade Israel, because Israel is the only country that's built for this, awaiting the Messiah. Once they invade, no big deal. All the kids with all the people in hyper-religious states are up in Megiddo at Armageddon. The Messiah and his father, another person who was able to kind of stabilize in a hyper-religious state without articulating everything, they roll down to Jerusalem to get murdered. 3.5 days later, for the grand finale, they get resurrected. And then Ark of the Covenant time / Kingdom of God time. Babylon falls. God's the king of the jungle. Case closed. Did it in 18 minutes.